Hey everyone, I'm Manero here, and in this video we're going to have a look at the brushes and illustrations I made during the second week of BrushTober 2023, so let's jump right into it. BrushTober is a special event where I create a Procreate brush and an illustration with that brush every day through October. You can see my daily progress on my social media accounts, so make sure to follow through the links below. If you want to know how you can get this brush set for free for a limited time, check out the info in the description of this video for all the details. For day 8, I made this brush called Rise of the Raster. It's a pretty straightforward painterly brush with a subtle texture and a nice flowing feel to it. This might sound a bit stupid, but the word raster, like in the fact that Procreate is a raster program, meaning that it works with pixels and not vectors, that word really evokes some kind of weird creature to me. Based on that idea, I thought how weird it would be to have a piece of sushi where instead of the fish-like ingredients, there was some kind of unknown creature on top of the rice, and it had like 1,000 eyes. I did look at some references of people grabbing sushi with the classic chopsticks, but not one reference in particular. I mainly worked on this illustration from imagination. As you can see, I started with a detailed sketch, so that I could materialize the idea I had in my mind into the canvas. It was fun making this living creature with so many eyes, looking at the person grabbing it. I also loved the design I came up with all those tentacles, with the one tentacle curling around one of the chopsticks. Once the sketch was convincing to me, I jumped into separating the different parts of the illustration with shapes of different colors in separated layers, so things would be easy to render separately later. I wanted to make this piece in full rendered style, without any kind of line art. By having alpha lock activated on each of the layers, rendering each part without affecting the others was a piece of cake. I based the colors for the creature in some kind of shrimp, but then I added extra details, like those color dots in the tentacles and the stripes on its back. At the end, I experimented a bit with the background, using a combination of gradient maps and curves adjustments, until I found something I liked. On day 9, I wanted to experiment on creating some kind of brush that I wouldn't normally do, just because it wouldn't normally fit into any of my existing brush sets. It's a dual brush with pressure sensitivity that reacts to your speed by splitting the line into two lines when you draw fast. I called this brush the Stabilization Illusion. For this illustration, I wanted to work on something delicate and with a sketchy feel to it. I found this beautiful photo referenced by Larry Rebirth that I thought was perfect for what I had in mind. I started by drawing the shape of the vase using the symmetry tool in Procreate. And when I had the main body down, I turned the symmetry guide off so I could draw the non-symmetrical parts of the vase, like the handle and the details in the body. On a different layer, I quickly improvised the flowers peeking out of the top of the vase. I drew with quick and energetic lines because I wanted the brush to show its sketchy nature and force it to split the lines at random spots. I continued by drawing the flowers painted in the body of the vase. And I added a simple horizontal line for the edge of the table and the shadow under the vase. Color-wise, I wanted to keep this one simple, so I painted the flowers with pure white. I did some basic shading in the vase with a slightly darker tone of the background color, and I painted the background with this middle tone gray in a sloppy way to fit with the sketchy style. I also added some bright yellow to the center of the flowers, a bit of complementary blue in the painted flowers in the base, and as a final touch, I alpha locked the line art and I colored some of the lines. For day 10, I created this brush that has a flat shape and leaves a very flat stroke, yet with a little bit of texture in the edges. While this brush paints very opaque, it has just the right amount of color variation to make the strokes look wet when painting one stroke next to the other. I called this brush Tragedy of the Wet Mix. For this illustration, I wanted to paint some kind of subject that would reflect the juicy quality of the brush, so I immediately thought on painting some delicious fruit. As soon as I found this fantastic photo reference by Tangerine Nude, I wanted to paint it. I loved how the green and brown colors from the Kiwi were popping against the vibrant yellow backgrounds. I started by painting the background, letting the color dynamics in the brush take care of adding wetness and texture. Then on a layer on top, I started painting the shapes for each of the pieces flying in the air. I painted the green of the pulp and the brown of the skin in different layers to make them easier to render later. I also added the berries on a different layer and those bits of kiwi dust in the air to evoke the explosion and movement of the subject. Then it was just a matter of going through the different layers, rendering and detailing while observing the reference closely. One thing I wanted to make sure during the whole process was to paint things a bit more stylized than in the photo by painting with simpler and geometrical shapes. This adds style and intention to our paintings instead of just straight copying the reference, which is always a nice way to give the painting our own personal touch. On day 11, I worked on a brush that I wanted to look a little bit like a pencil, but still be cool enough to function as the final line art. I achieved this by giving the brush a pencil-like texture, but enough opaqueness to the stroke, that the lines you make with them have certain consistency. I called this brush Rebirth of the brush tip. Back to drawing anthropomorphic animals. For this one I took inspiration from the comic book Mouse Guard by David Peterson. I always loved his technical approach to inking and his fantastic creature designs with an interesting mix of cartoony yet kind of realistic style. So I decided to draw a mouse with a Viking attire standing on top of a tree branch. My intention was not to straight copy David Peterson's characters, but more like capturing the spirit of his art while giving my mouse my own style. I planned the whole idea by doing a rough sketch, and then lowering the opacity and working on the clean final line work on a new layer. I paid attention to carefully working the details in the mouse and his clothes, and I also did some hand-drawn cross-hatching to add texture and shading. For the background, I tried to separate the different leaves and branches in multiple planes by giving the ones in the back a black filling. This gives a nice depth by making those branches and leaves in silhouette appear further away. As for the coloring part, I tried to stay within a dull palette, painting with desaturated colors and similar values, and adding a very simple flat shading, giving this antique tale book look to the illustration. For day 12, I played with a really grainy texture and came up with this cool brush that I feel it has a lot of personality to it. The texture is fairly big and noticeable and blends well when using the brush with the Smudge tool. I called this brush Battle for Brushland. The name I gave to this brush is one of those that really gave me some ideas for what to draw. I imagined a battlefield with knights or warriors riding pencil horses and holding brushes as if they were spears. I started by laying down my idea with a quick sketch. Once I was happy with the concept and composition, I lowered the sketch's opacity and started to define the final lines on a new layer. I always love to experiment with different style approaches depending on the brush I'm using, and this one compelled me to ink the drawing with thick lines, without almost any line weight variation. The texture of the brush was visible, even when filling in those blacks, and I think it gave the style I was going for a nice touch. Once I finished the inking, it was time to decide what kind of lighting setting I was going to choose. I thought it would be nice and dramatic if I painted the sky as a beautiful sunset. I basically looked at several sunset photos and used the lighting I was observing in them as reference. Once the sky was established, it was easier for me to determine how that lighting would affect the other elements in the image, like the ground and the characters. Usually sunset lighting makes everything look more purple, especially if things are backlit. A nice trick I used for coloring the main character was to completely ignore the lighting of the scene at first, and just color it thinking in terms of local color. I then added a purple layer on top in darken mode to tint all the colors into a more purple shade. And on a new layer in add mode, I used a muted orange to paint the rim light from the sun, hitting the figure from behind. I duplicated the base layer with all the local colors. I gave it a light blue tint. I placed it on top of all the other layers, and using a mask, I revealed some parts of this bluish layer to simulate the light of the blue sky reflecting on the top parts of the figure. At the end I played with the curves tool to balance the colors in the whole scene a little bit better. On day 13, I came up with this super cloudy painterly brush. I loved the texture and how it basically looked like dense smoke. It has a nice opacity control by pressure and great blending capabilities. I called this brush the secret of the smudge. Halloween is near the corner and we're already seeing so many cool Halloween themed artworks being posted on social media that I couldn't resist any longer. So for this day, I improvised a Halloween scene with some chill pumpkins. I have to be honest, I didn't plan this one out at all. I just let myself carry away during the painting process. First I added one pumpkin, then I decided that instead of having a scary face, I would give it a cute smile, like if it was saying hi to this cute birdie visitor. Sometimes you don't need a big idea, just something to start from, and focus on the rendering fun. I made the lighted up interior of the pumpkin illuminate the surface in which the bird was standing to make this area the focal point of my illustration. I also added this cold rim light on top of the pumpkin to give the image a nice color balance. I then duplicated the pumpkin a couple of times. I moved them to the sides and modified them so that they wouldn't look the exact same. I made them darker and changed their stems. Then I added the silhouettes of a couple more pumpkins behind, and I lighted up the background to make the scene look more dramatic. As a final touch, I added this cute wood texture to the ground surface, and I painted some dots on the ground and on the main pumpkin to give the impression of detail. On day 14, I went full on experimental and made this brush with a really fun crumpled paper texture and soft edges. I thought it would be a bit hard to work on my illustration for this day using only this brush, but I was up for the challenge. I called the brush Origami. I continued with the Halloween theme, but for this illustration I used this awesome photo by Tandem X Visuals for reference. As I figured, this brush was quite hard to work with because of its extremely limiting texture, but I'm glad I sticked with it, because I absolutely love the end results, as you will see later. What I found that made it easier to work with this brush was to rotate the canvas from time to time, and this would allow me to paint more opaque in some areas that definitely needed it. As for the rest of my process, it was just a matter of observing the reference closely and trying to represent what I was seeing with limited brush strokes. It was all about embracing the crumpled paper texture and let it affect the resulting artwork. I truly loved the look on this piece, something I would have never achieved if I didn't push through, working with an unconventional brush like this one. And this is it for today. These are the 7 brushes I did this week for my BrushTober Challenge 2023. Let me know in the comments which of these brushes was your favorite so far. Don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss the next video, and give me a thumbs up. Also make sure to check out my Gumroad page and consider making a purchase before the end of October to get this unique brush set for free. I have tons of Procreate brush sets available, and I'm sure something will suit your artistic needs. All the links are in the description below. Okay, thank you for watching. See you next time.